Good morning. All right. AT Daily number 3. Let's give people a chance to find the show. We're fasting here a little later than yesterday. We're still working out how this AT Daily show is going to go. I think it's more or less going to be between 9:30 and 10 Pacific time most days. But today, for example, I had a business meeting and it had to be delayed. It's just not going to be conceivable to be the same time every day. But I'm going to make the most concerted effort possible that it should be in the morning at about 9:30 to 10 Pacific time every day. How is everybody? Who's in the house? Marcelo Kemeny, my cousin, in the house. Nice to see you. Who else is here? Tell us in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? Very important to hear from you. Signal to Facebook that this is a show people care about, that it's a conversation starter. The more you comment, the more that the show will reach the rest of our audience. It's just the way Facebook works. I see Regina is in from Delaware. Michael Reichler's in the house. Come on, folks. Who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? It is the third day of the new Talmud cycle. We're really excited. It's fantastic. Nina's in the house, thank God, and she's monitoring comments. Irma is in from Oklahoma. Michael from Swampscott, Maine. Massachusetts. I just love saying Swampscott. Let me turn this off. Okay. All right, we've got a lot to cover. I'm just going to get right into it. First of all, we've already had a controversy on the page today. We are fasting because it's a minor fast in the Jewish calendar. It's the 10th of the Jewish month, the Hebrew month of Tevis or Tevet. And historically, this is when the first temple siege of Jerusalem began. So this was going to be a very long siege. It took 2.5 years. It's Nebuchadnezzar's army that came, laid siege to Jerusalem, and ultimately broke through the walls and destroyed the first temple. We understand that it might have been Nebuchadnezzar who did the destroying, but it was our own sins that caused us to lose the merit, to deserve to have a temple in our midst. And eventually God forgave us, and we had the opportunity to build the second temple. So this is a day of fasting when that process began, when the siege began. And fast days are all about examining our own deeds. That's why any fast day is always very relevant to the present. The controversy is, when did that happen historically? There's a commonly, you'll find it all over the internet, that the date that the year that the first temple was finally destroyed, the siege took 2.5 years, and so that the first temple was finally destroyed in 586 before the Common Era. But Jewish sources date that as 425 before the Common Era. Big discrepancy, almost 160 years difference. Why? The academic dating comes from other sources outside Jewish sources, including the records of the Babylonian kings. I actually called my friend Zvi Freeman, a senior editor at Chabad.org, because in the Chabad article on Chabad.org about this issue, it says the 425 date before the Common Era for the beginning of the siege. And I said, what's up with the difference? And there's actually been a lot of discussion about the so-called missing years in the Jewish calendar. In our post about this fast and the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, we're going with the 425, that the siege began in 425 before the Common Era. This is dating according to our sages because our tradition holds that the two temples lasted for approximately the same amount of time, 410 or 420 years, that there was 70 years between the destruction of the first temple and when King Cyrus, encouraged the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild our temple. then another 400 years, and eventually the Second Temple fell in the year 70 of the Common Era because of the Roman destruction. So in terms of our tradition, this date, 425, concurs with the sages. And as Rabbi Freeman told me this morning, the academic dating of 586 is held together with duct tape. I love that. And in truth, we're not looking down on academia, but it is the work of academics to base their conclusions on evidence. There's multiple pieces of evidence here. And the date will change when new evidence comes in. And it is very possible that eventually the evidence will show that our sages are correct. Our sages are taking their dates from Scripture, from the tradition, from a reality and a truth greater than whatever evidence is available at this time. So that's what's going on with the fast. A minor fast means that we don't eat between sunrise and sunset. When is sunset? When 3 stars come out. And this is what we've been discussing in these opening pages of the Talmud Daf Yomi cycle. We're now on the 3rd page. So this is Brokas Daf Dalet. And we've been involved in a conversation about from when and until when may we say the evening Shema, the basic declaration of God's unity, the basic prayer. And we established that we can start to say it in the evening from when 3 small stars are visible. And until when. So that's a discussion we're going to be involved in on this page. And in truth, we can say it all night and fulfill our obligation, but the rabbis decreed that we must say it by midnight. By midnight, and that is a fence around the Torah. Why? Because we might come in and be tired and have a little food and lay down and say, I'll just take a little nap and then I'll get up and pray. And then we fall asleep and sleep all night and miss the nighttime when we're supposed to say the nighttime Shema. That rabbinic decree has all the full weight and power of a scriptural decree in the Jewish tradition. This is very important to understand. We will always distinguish between a rabbinic decree and a Torah decree. We need to know where it comes from. What the rabbi said is not the same as what God says. However, the weight of a rabbinic decree is as important, and in some cases more important than a Torah decree, not because the rabbis have more authority than God, but simply because that weight has to be given to their decrees to make sure that the people will follow it and not say, well, it's just something people made up, so I don't need to do it. And the rabbis even say that one who violates, it's in this page, a rabbinic decree is liable to the death penalty. They do not mean that we haul people in front of a court of judges and say, hey, this guy violated a rabbinic decree, he's liable to the death penalty. What we mean is it is as severe as something that could result in a death penalty. Why? Because you're violating the will of God. How are you violating the will of God? You are violating the system that God established for us. It says in the Torah that you will listen to the leaders at that time, meaning the rabbinic leaders who can establish what the law is. We don't pick and choose. We don't make up the law as we go along. And what is really going on in these early pages and throughout these first tractates, and particularly Berachos, right? The first tractate of the Talmud in the Daf Yomi cycle is called Brokas Blessings. And the rabbis are establishing the order of prayers. We're essentially establishing the siddur. And so here on this page, there's going to be a lot of debate, not only about when we say the Shema, but what do we say after it and before it, right? So what's really taking shape here is the siddur, the prayer book, the order of Jewish prayers. One of the things that's debated in this page, in a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, is do we finish the evening prayer service with the Shema, because that means we're very close to lying down, and we've been commanded to say the Shema when we lie down and when we rise up, Or, like in the morning, when we say the Shema, and then afterwards say the Amidah, the 18 blessings, the what is actually called the prayer, right? The Shema is a declaration of God's unity. The 18 blessings are when we thank God and praise God and ask God to grant us what we need in our life. Do we say the Shema and then, we'll talk much more as it comes up in later pages, but the Amidah or the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings, do we say the Shema and then the 18 blessings of the Amidah like we do in the morning, or in the evening do we reverse that order and say the Amidah first and then finish with the Shema? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said you say the Amidah first and then say the Shema, because in the Shema it says say it right, when you're lying down. His logic was good, but the rabbis ruled with Rabbi Yochanan. Now, normally, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who was so saintly and so learned and such a big sage, that we always follow Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, or just about always, and his prayers were always answered, and he had frequent consultations with Elijah, in Hebrew, Eliyahu, and so we almost always follow Yehoshua ben Levi, but in this matter, we go with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says is that we do it like in the morning. We say the Shema, and then we say the Amidah. The Amidah is always preceded by, O Lord, open up my lips, that my mouth shall declare thy praise. And finish with, may the words of my heart and may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. And everything in between that is the Amidah prayer. In the morning we say Shema, and then Amidah. And in the evening, we do the same thing. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi gets the last word. Because even if we go to synagogue and we do it properly and we say the Shema and the Amidah with a minyan, or we do it on our own at home if we're not able to get with a minyan, still, when we go to bed, we say the Shema one more time. The bedtime Shema is a little different. We only are obligated to say the first paragraph, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your resources, etc. Just the first paragraph of that. You don't have to do the second and third paragraph, though some people do all three paragraphs in bed. Okay. Along the way, because we're establishing, and a lot of this is establishing the prayer book for all time. Now let's take a step back. Why was it so important for these sages to work out the order of prayers for a Jew during each day of his life? Because they are arguing all of this and figuring this out after the fall of the Second Temple. Judaism is no longer a temple, a Jerusalem temple-centered religion. They are taking all the teachings of Torah that they've been studying for 1,000 years and translating them. There's already prayers, there's already daily prayers, there's already all kinds of practices like this, but they're standardizing how that offering to God that we make of our time and our prayers is going to replace the offerings of sheep and cattle and goats and birds that we had been making in the temple in Jerusalem. And so for all time, or let's say for the next 2,000 years up until our day, these rabbis are establishing the daily order of prayers. Another thing that they say here in this Daf Dalet of the Talmud is that, and who says it? Hold on a second. Rebbe Lazar, right? Rebbe Lazar said that Rabbi Avina said that anyone who recites a Psalm of David, Psalm number 145, 3 times a day, is assured of a place in the world to come. If you say Ashrei, now already we've established that the real obligation is to say Shema and Shemona Esrei, Shema and the Amidah, right? The Shema in its 3 paragraphs, and then the prayer, what's called, quote, the prayer, with the 18 blessings. which we say 3 times a day. Those are for sure the obligations, and then there's other blessings around them. But now Rabbi Lazar is saying in the name of Rabbi Avina, Ashrei is the key to heaven. You have to say this one 3 times a day. What is so special about Ashrei? This is Psalm 145. And then Rabbi's question, what is so special about it? Well, it has 2 features. Ashrei is written as an acrostic. The first letter of every verse follows the alphabet, the Aleph Bet, right? So the first verse starts with the Aleph, the second with Bet, etc. It's an acrostic that helps you remember the prayer. That's an important feature. The rabbis challenge that and say, well, why not Psalm 119, which has the Aleph Bet repeated as an acrostic 8 times? That's a very long psalm. They say, well, perhaps it's because Ashrei also includes the beautiful line, which we say at other times in our ritual life, even when we make motzi, Posech es yadecha umasbia lechol chai ratzon. God opens his hand and satisfies the need of every creature. That's a very important verse. But that verse and that thought is stated several times in the great Hallel, which I think is Psalm 136, which whenever we have a Rosh Chodesh musical davening, you've heard on our show, we do Hallel. So the sages conclude, but Ashrei has both the acrostic nature and this line, you open your hand and satisfy the needs of every creature. And that's why Ashrei, Psalm 145, has a special status. If you're looking to take on a prayer practice, you're not ready to commit to everything yet, say Ashrei 3 times a day. Right? This is a very, very beautiful prayer. Check out Psalm 145. And when you reach that verse, you open your hand and satisfy the needs of every creature. You focus with special intensity on that verse. Okay. The other thing I just wanted to mention that was also mentioned in this page is David. King David was the psalmist. He composed and collected all of the psalms. Who's holier than King David? King David merits to be the ancestor of the Messiah. When the Messiah comes, he'll be a descendant of King David. King David merited to establish Jerusalem as the capital and to collect all the materials that his son Solomon would actually turn into the Holy Temple. I mean, no one is holier and greater than King David. And yet, we learn on this page of David's great, great humility, his tremendous humility, that David did not believe that he was certain to have a place in the world to come. The sages argue, was he a little bit insecure about his place in the world to come because of past deeds or future deeds? In other words, was he looking at his past and saying, ooh, I don't know, I did commit a big sin and I might not get in because of that? In future places in the Talmud that sages will argue, was David guilty in the incident of Bathsheba? This is a story told in the Book of Kings. His eye fell on the beautiful Bathsheba. Her husband was a soldier in David's army. David had him sent to the front lines, and tragically he was killed in that war. And then David was able to marry Bathsheba, and she would eventually become the mother of King Solomon. Did he sin in creating that sequence of events? The prophet Nathan said, yeah, you did. But the sages will argue, well, actually, there are reasons why he did not sin. But here in this discussion, our sages are saying that David might have been unsure of his place because of that sin. And others will argue, no. The reason he's unsure of his place in the world to come, even though he has accomplished so much and been and become such a holy person and the great psalmist for all time, still, even such a righteous person, maybe one of the greatest tzaddikim in history, could not be sure that he would not sin in the future. And this is a lesson to us all. No matter what we've accomplished, no matter how much we've come, no matter how much we've refined our character, we must never assume that we have overcome all temptation, that we would not fall prey to some future temptation, and therefore we must be on guard at all times against temptation and against falling prey to that kind of temptation. Hopefully that phone will stop ringing momentarily. I don't know. Just let it go. Now, what I also wanted to say about King David is that the sages are discussing that because he might have been feeling, guilty about the incident of Bathsheba, he made tremendous atonement for it. He humbled himself. Though he was king, one of the deeds that he did to remain humble and to atone for possible misdeeds was his Torah study. And he would awake, as we said yesterday, at midnight every night to engage in Torah study for the rest of the night. But also that he would get his hands dirty, as it were, and get involved in the ritual questions of the nation, that he would actually issue judgments like a rabbi, and that women would come to him with questions of family purity, and men would come to him with other kinds of questions. And in issuing judgments on these, mundane matters that are far beneath the dignity of a king, he would even sort of put aside his royal dignity even more, and he would consult with Torah authorities. And so even though he was so close to God and had conversations with God and had this amazingly close relationship with God all of his life, he would submit to the authority of Torah sages who knew more about Torah and God's will than he did. And if David would submit to the authority, dignity, and learning of our sages, how much more should we submit to the authority and learning and good intent of our sages? And so that brings us back around to where we started, that when we look at a question like when was the first temple destroyed, academic and archaeological evidence suggests the possibility that it was 586 before the Common Era. And our sages say the year was 425 before the Common Era. So we go with our sages. And that's not to say that we cast aside science or academic learning. It's just that science and academic learning fulfill its function in the world by saying, according to the evidence that we've seen, this is what we know now. And then this idea of consensus among academics means that until we have better evidence, and there's nothing complete consensus among academics for anything. I think that's something that we see in the news all too often these days, like all scientists agree or all professors agree, and it's anything that all agree on is probably problematic. But when the vast majority agree, it's something we certainly take seriously. But in this case, I trust our sages to tell us about our own Jewish history. Okay, that is the material that I wanted to cover today. I'll stay a little longer in case people have a question. And let me just scroll here on the phone. Hello, Linda. Hello, John. Hello, Robert Zev. Hello, Karen from Yerushalayim. And Yasir says good night. I guess you're in Europe somewhere. Supporting the state of Israel is in from the East Coast. Deborah from Austin, Texas. Abraham from Marseille, France. And Biswalo Peter Malima from Tanzania. I assume that's Tanzania. Wow, we're on every continent. This is so great. Steve Mitchell from Ellicott City, Maryland. And Paul Papasnicki, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, from Louisiana. And okay, and then let's see. And Benny says, Yasher Koach. All right, my friends, it's been wonderful to share this AT Daily number 4, or number 3? What's this show? This is number 3 with you on DAF 4. And we're going to keep it going. So hope to see you tomorrow. I hope that these insights into the daily DAF and what's going on in the Jewish calendar are helpful to you in your journey whether it's your spiritual journey, your physical journey, your academic journey, your intellectual journey, your emotional journey. You guys fill me up, we fill you up, and let's keep it going. All the best, my holy brothers and sisters.